Hello and welcome to Point of View. I'm Grant Mangan. The earthquakes not only devastated buildings and roads, they also did a lot of damage to our public transport system. Patronage plummeted after the earthquakes, and it's been a long, slow, hard road to recovery. But they are on the road to recovery. Today our guest is Environment Canterbury Commissioner Rex Williams. Commissioner Williams, how are passenger numbers recovering post-quake?
Well, quite satisfactorily. Just to put a figure on it, post-quake we'd got up to 17 million passenger trips a year. That went back to about 12 and it's up to about 14 million now. And we expect over the next 2 years to get up to 16 million. So that's our planning. So they're coming up.
Were any bus services unaffected by the quakes?
The district lines, Tarangia and Lincoln, were less affected, but everybody was disrupted to some extent. I mean, in some cases the passengers weren't there, in other cases the bridges weren't there, and roadworks, etc., etc. So it varied from place to place.
But still pretty much across the board.
Yes.
Yeah. So now, 3 years on, which services are performing better? Are there some standout services?
Well, the Orbiter, that bright idea by someone some years ago is working very, very well. And there are some traffic congestion issues which are getting in the way of that, but numbers continue to grow on the Orbiter. And also the first part of the hubs and spokes, the blue line, that's going well. So from Northland into the city, passenger numbers are going well.
You refer to hub and spoke. What does that actually mean in plain English?
Yes. So I think the important thing to remember is hubs and spokes. And so we have the hubs and what they call the key attractors. You might think of as malls, but it's not just the malls. It might be Pioneer Stadium or something like that. So those can be hubs, and then there's a central hub. So instead of having all the buses running into the central hub, we have them running to a series of hubs out in the suburbs, and then spokes feeding from those hubs into the central hub. And it's a system that's taken a bit of courage to think about and to install, but I'm pretty confident that it's working well, and the future planning for extension of it will work as well.
What are the benefits, if any, for passengers from a hub and spoke model?
The frequency, particularly the frequency and of lines and the run from Northlands to the city is one that I experience. Mostly on my bicycle, I see the blue line going past, I should say. But so the frequency of that run and the fewer buses, so less congestion. And then, so instead of having a wall of buses going down, say, Papanui Road, we've got just buses every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes. And so the passengers can rely on that trip frequently and on time. So that's the advantage to them.
Is reliability, though, an issue in the post-quake environment? Because obviously a lot of roadworks going on, and Skirt did say that 2014 would be the year of roadworks.
Yes.
So is that having a detrimental effect on passenger numbers, do you think, and on reliability?
Yes, I think it is to some extent, but it's something that the bus companies and the planners in ECAN work on daily, really. And then recently there's been the control, what they call the traffic control organisation, which is NZTA, Christchurch City and ECAN, and they are adjusting traffic lights and that sort of thing to enhance that. And they're taking the bus passenger into account when they do that. So it's helping. But certainly we'll be pleased to see the end of the significant roadworks.
Given the exodus of around 10,000 people from the red zoned areas in the eastern suburbs, will there be sufficient residents left there to support public transport services in the future?
Yes, obviously it's going to affect things. We expect that there will still be a service, a modified service. There may be an opportunity to bring in smaller vehicles, more appropriate to that, because those roadworks out in that area are going to continue for some time, as we know. But I should say that we're monitoring passenger numbers and passenger behaviour all the time, always have been, since well before the earthquake, of course. And people perhaps don't understand that those fine adjustments are being made every 2 or 3 months to adjust timetables or adjust routes in some cases. So that area around the red zone will require significant adjustment, but we're onto it. We don't just carry on as before, obviously. Yeah.
Quite a lot of the residents who've gone from the red zones have moved out to the outlying districts, such as Waimakariri and Selwyn. Has that impacted on public transport numbers, and does that mean that you're having to also regularly review the services you provide to Rolleston, Lincoln or Rangiora?
Yes. So the Blue Line, which originates in Rangiora, comes in, yes, that's had increased patronage. And the Selwyn Star, I think it was the Yellow Line, the Selwyn Star, same. So yeah, we're picking it up, and at peak times, adding vehicles if necessary.
Do you know much about where previous passengers have moved to?
Yeah. Well, it's the numbers, but it's also their behaviour, and so we can monitor how many stops they travel and whether people want to be in a certain location by 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. and what their return journey is. So there's a lot of work goes into that, and we have 3 people full-time getting the information, and these are highly skilled, highly qualified people, getting information, monitoring those behaviours, trying to take into account school closures or school movements, what's happening at Easter, how does this rugby affect these things, all those sorts of things being taken into account to optimise the routes.
It does sound like quite a complex kind of calculation or formulas that you're actually having to work through. Is there also a challenge in that if you want to change bus routes, because it's a tendered system, there's obviously quite a long process that you've got to go through. Is that hampering or holding back the recovery of the network simply because of the time frames involved?
No, not really, because the adjustments that we've made, most of the adjustments are fine-tuning, and the bus companies are willing to deal with that fine-tuning. I wonder if I could just make a simple point that I learned when I got into this role about, so how do you set up the network? So going back 10 or 15 years, as I understand it, there was a lot of consultation with the people of Greater Christchurch, and the simple philosophy is that 98% of the households within Greater Christchurch will be within 500 metres of a bus route. And along the bus route will be a bus stop on average every 400 metres, so that 98% of the households will be within 7 to 10 minutes walk of a bus stop. So when you start with that, and then you talk to the road controlling authority, that is the city or Waimak or Selwyn District Council, where can we put bus stops, so that also colours what's going to happen. And then the third element is who's going to pay for it. And so in general terms, the passenger pays 50% of the total cost, the taxpayer 25% through NZTA subsidy, and the ratepayer 25%. So if you take into account that simple model, a lot of other things start to fall out of it. And after that, you can fine-tune the routes. But that's the network we're based on. That's a slight setback in our planning because we wanted to get that Selwyn Star line, the Hornby to CBD line up and running by the end of this calendar year. We will need to work with the city to improve the infrastructure, particularly at Recton. And my major concern there is safety, passenger safety, people crossing the roads and things like that. So we'll work with them. I think the one good thing is that, and it's an initiative I claim, is that the joint working group that was set up with the City Council about 18 months ago, originally with Councillor Claudia Reid and I having a cup of coffee and saying we should be able to do this better. And we've now got a formal working committee which is working through those matters, and we've got our first meeting with the new council in late February. And that's where we discuss in an informal manner the little issues and see what we can do. So I think there'll be something good come out of that.
the lack of a CBD hampering the recovery of passenger numbers?
Yes, it is. Yeah, but those are the cards we dealt with. We need to work on that. Yes.
So, given that, is building a new central city interchange a priority, or should in fact the City Council be supporting the hub and spoke model by perhaps putting interchanges into the suburban locations in the first instance and then perhaps worrying about the CBD when there's a bit more in the CBD, given that it's fairly empty at the moment?
Yes. Well, we'd like to see all of it prioritised, of course, but it's chicken and egg, because if we have a good PT system into the CBD, it's going to enhance the recovery there. So we're happy to, ECAN's planning is happy to play its part and make sure that there's good public transport available to the CBD as it recovers. As to where the City Council should be putting their money, that's a decision up to them. They're as interested in good public transport as we are, and so I think they realise that we need good infrastructure everywhere.
On the subject of infrastructure though, their progress has been a bit mixed. Last year the City Council planned to open a bus interchange in Riccarton, but in the end they decided not to go ahead with that. What went wrong, to your knowledge?
Well, I think the council had a discussion about the matter and made a decision. I mean, at the community board level, there'd been one decision made, but then the City Council made another decision. That's a slight setback in our planning, because we wanted to get that Selwyn Star line, the Hornby to CBD line, up and running by the end of this calendar year. We will need to work with the city to improve the infrastructure, particularly at Riccarton. My major concern there is safety, passenger safety, people crossing the roads and things like that. So we'll work with them. I think the one good thing is that, and it's an initiative I claim, is that the joint working group that was set up with the City Council about 18 months ago, originally with Councillor Claudia Reid and I having a cup of coffee and saying we should be able to do this better. And we've now got a formal working committee which is working through those matters, and we've got our first meeting with the new council in late February. And that's where we discuss in an informal matter the little issues and see what we can do. So I think there'll be something good come out of that.
Are you aware of any plans that the City Council may have to try and get a transfer of public transport funding and planning from ECAN to the city?
I read about it in the newspaper now and again, but that's the extent of it. I should say that in the first month or so in this role, I had a coffee with the former mayor and CEO, and it was one of the topics that was discussed. So just for a minute or two, and they said, well, we'll talk about it in the future. Well, I guess we'll talk about it in the future, but in the meantime, I think, especially with this joint committee working and the way I see our staff working together now, we've got the best of both worlds. And particularly with the growth in patronage to Waimak and Selwyn, I think that the respective mayors would have something to say about how the buses are operated as well. So I'm satisfied that we've got a good system, as long as we can work together on it.
So you don't see that there'd be any advantages to a straightforward transfer of public transport funding and planning from ECAN to the City Council?
No, I don't. No.
That's pretty direct. All right. Does this, in your discussions with the City Council through your working party, do you get the sense from them that they recognise the importance of addressing some of those infrastructure kind of issues, both in terms of interchanges, but also bus lanes or bus priority to ensure that even if there are roadworks, that buses can get on time?
Yes, well, that was certainly, I mean, we had 4 joint working committee meetings with the previous council, and those were exactly the issues that we were discussing in those meetings. And I should say, if I could use a minor anecdote, that I'm encouraged that Councillor Phil Clearwater, who's chair of the committee and who'll be coming along to those meetings, I spoke to him last Wednesday about the agenda. we missed each other, but we finally had a conversation at 6 p.m. on Friday evening, and he was still cheerful and willing to talk about the joint committee and things like that. So he seems to have a very positive approach to it, and I look forward to working with him. There are some pluses at the moment. I mean, the number of bikes on buses is continuing to increase significantly. Late last year we held a program to encourage the disabled to use more buses, and I meet with the Disabled Persons Assembly 3 or 4 times a year and listen to their views. And after that seminar, we've had more disabled people using buses. So there are a lot of marketing activities going on to improve patronage, particularly to help the less fortunate.
Critics are always saying to me, look, the buses are always empty. Do you hear that very often, or is it just an urban myth?
Well, no, I hear it, and of course buses must be empty at some stage, either at the start of the run or at the end of the run. and because if they were full at the end of the run, well, we've got something wrong with our network. It's a matter, I mean, we can produce passenger figures, we can produce sort of graphs and things like that, and we can demonstrate that bus companies are happy to tender for the work, and we get good rates, and we get good feedback from the passengers who are on the buses. So, yeah, I'm not too worried about those critics. There are often people who I say, incidentally, are driving around in large cars on their own.
Well, I'm always intrigued by the fact that the same people who criticise buses for being empty never criticise taxis for being empty. So I'm thinking, well, aren't these all forms of public transport?
Yes.
Anyway, the other criticism, which I hear quite a bit, is people saying that buses are too big. And you did actually mention earlier that for some routes, maybe smaller buses might be required. So are smaller buses potentially an option in the future?
For some routes, yes, certainly. But we do need to remember that at peak time, the buses are absolutely full. And so at peak time, we need those larger buses, and because otherwise we'll have 2 or 3 smaller buses. And so it's a matter of capacity, and I'm not a bus operator, but the difference between operating a large bus, actually they're medium-sized buses by world standards, aren't they? The difference between that and a smaller bus, the operating costs are not that great, in the same way as between large cars and small cars. We don't see only small cars on the road. So I hear the criticism. We work with the bus companies, we provide flexibility. If they say we'd like to run a smaller bus here, certainly we work with them to do that.
Is ECAN doing enough now to promote the public transport system? Clearly it was difficult, if not impossible, to do that in the immediate post-quake period, but now you've got patronage growing, you've got the services more bedded in, and your hub and spoke not all working. It's now the time to kind of go and share the good news?
Yes, I think so, but it's like any marketing effort. How do you spend the money? Where is it best spent? What's the best time to spend it? I think that I'd like to think that the Hornby Christchurch, the Yellow Line, the Selwyn Star route, once we get some certainty on that, and that to some extent depends on that Riccarton interchange, then there'll be an opportunity for us to say, excuse me, we really do have our good system back and make some effort. There are some pluses at the moment. I mean, the number of bikes on buses is continuing to increase significantly. Late last year we held a program to encourage the disabled to use more buses, and I meet with the Disabled Persons Assembly 3 or 4 times a year and listen to their views. And after that seminar, we've had more disabled people using buses. So there are a lot of marketing activities going on to improve patronage, particularly to help the less fortunate.
What would you like to accomplish with public transport before your term as a Commissioner comes to an end, whenever that might be?
Yes. Well, I'd like us to back up that target. I mean, we've got really this 5-year target of 20 million passenger trips, and I'd like us to get back up there. I'd like us to be providing an excellent service so that people are actively, positively getting onto the buses and not being forced on through other circumstances, through fuel shocks or anything like that. I mean, we want to make the buses seem like the popular choice. I'd like to see more integration with the bicycle trails, and so my vision for the park and ride is really for people to be riding to, say, Northlands, and us providing facilities there so that they can then ride. I'd like to see a growth in what we call vehicle trusts, so that organisations like Governor's Bay, who can't have a routine bus service. I mean, there are vehicle trusts in Kaiapoi, Geraldine, Waimati, Twizel and those places, so that we're providing some public transport for them. I'd like to see an improvement in the total mobility access to help people. So there's a lot more to public transport than the buses, but I think greater patronage on the buses is certainly an important issue.
What's your message to former passengers or residents about why they should try the public transport system?
Well, please give it a go again. Encourage your children to try it. I think that's one thing where we can really get those school-age people to be using buses, and once they get into the habit of it, it becomes routine. So that's what I'd like to do. Anecdotally, I noticed that a lot of the people in the construction industry who have come into Christchurch from overseas, they seem to be using the buses a lot, because you see the high-vis jackets on the buses, and I think it's just a culture of using public transport, and that's what I'm encouraging our staff to get that culture change, so people will use public transport.
Our guest today was Environment Canterbury Commissioner Rex Williams. Until the next time, I'm Grant Mangan. Goodbye.